Session tonight, what we're going to be covering is what colleges look for in applicants. So we're going to talk a little bit about all of the really cool, fun stuff associated with how colleges actually evaluate applicants, which you may have attended a previous session. We're going to be covering a lot of the same content here, but we're also going to be taking a lot of questions kind of along the way. And then we're going to be talking about the 5 traits that colleges look for in applicants and talking about how to actually go about implementing those within your Common App essay and with supplements and all of that sort of fun stuff. Okay. We're going to be pausing a lot along the way to take questions. Gerard is going to be managing the questions, but go ahead and drop those questions into the chat, or you can drop them into the Q&A. Either of those works. We'll be taking those as we go. Gerard will be interrupting me if I forget anything or if there's questions that should be coming up. All of that sort of fun stuff. And so please, if you are, please mute yourself if you have not done so already. And let's go ahead and get rolling. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to go through some content pretty quickly, so we have enough time to take a lot of questions associated with things. But we're going to be covering a lot of information that's extremely valuable for your student, especially as they're working on their essays. And it's a lot of information that honestly, is not necessarily information that gets shared with students, but is also mission critical for them being successful. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, and let me go ahead and put it in some sort of presentation mode so it can be super fancy. Quick introduction to myself and Gerard. We're from Prompt. We are the world's leading provider of college essay coaching and feedback. We support thousands and thousands of students a year with boot camps, one-on-one coaching, all from the start to the end of the essay process, as well as like individual reviews of, hey, I already have a draft and I just want some feedback on it from an essay coach. So our essay coaches are the top 2% of all writing coaches in the world. How do we know this? It's because we get thousands and thousands of applicants to be writing coaches, and only about 2% of them actually make it into our network to work with your students. All right. So already talked about what we're going to talk about today, so we're going to dive right in. If you want, you can go to prompt.com/road-to-college. We'll talk about this later, but you can see some of the options that we have for working with your students. But this single most important thing, if you're going to walk away from this evening, is anytime that you're writing something, what really matters is to consider, what does your audience actually care about? These essays are probably one of the first times in your student's life that they will actually write for an audience that's not their teacher. Okay. And unfortunately, we do a lot of work outside of college admissions essays. We're a writing school, essentially. And what we find is that many times in the classroom, students are not really necessarily taught from a writing planning process perspective to really consider their audience and consider what their audience cares about. So we're going to start with that, right? That's going to be a huge theme of this evening. We're going to be talking about the 5 traits that colleges look for in applicants. But in order to get there, what's really helpful is to take a look at the data and take a look at actually how colleges are evaluating applicants. Okay. So, oh yeah, and also forgot to mention this, and I think I'm going to get in trouble with Gerard if I don't mention this. We're going to be giving away 3 attendances at our boot camps actually at this session. So at the end of this, Gerard's going to be kind of raffling off, calling out some names as we head into the Q&A, which will be super fun. That's $199 to go through our boot camp. So we're going to be giving away 3 of those this evening. So the entire purpose of what your audience cares about is that you will succeed in college and after you graduate. Not you all, parents, I mean your kids, okay? So what they care about is how they're evaluating your applicant and your student is that your student will succeed in college and after they graduate. So how do they go about determining that, okay? And that's where the application process comes in. And there's a really simple way to look at this. Some schools have more complex systems than this for evaluating applicants, but by and large, this is how the vast majority of schools go about it. You get a score for your academic profile and you get a score for your non-academic profile, which is most commonly called the personal score. Okay. The easiest way to look at this is put it on a matrix, right? You have your academic score, you have your personal score, and the higher both of those scores are, the higher your admissions chances. That's the general gist of it. Doesn't matter kind of what institutions you're applying to. That's the general gist of it. Now, there's a couple of key concepts here. One is what we call the academic bar. Okay, so any student that has a academic score above the academic bar means that that school believes that that student is capable of being academically successful at that college. Okay, at their college. This is a really critical and important concept, the academic bar, because if you're below it, no matter how strong your essays are, you're probably not going to get it. But if you're above it, that's when essays really start mattering in a very significant way. Okay. The same goes for the personal bar. This is a little less relevant because students below the personal bar are essentially like, by reading your application, I'm identifying like character flaws in you. So relatively few students are below the personal bar, but we'll actually see some data on this that you can see how few it really is. But this is also, you know, an important concept as well. And when we talk about this, right, what makes up both of these scores? The academic score is exactly how you think. It's all of your academic profile. It's your grades, maybe standardized test scores. The strength of your curriculum actually really matters. So how many, let's say, advanced placement classes you've taken, or if you're in the IB curriculum, what classes you've taken there, and then your grades associated with those scores. A couple quick highlights mentioning here, just because it's interesting, and we often have to tell parents this. Depending on the institution you're applying to, the academic score is usually based off of grades from sophomore, junior, and then the first part of your senior year. They usually, a lot of schools throw out freshman year grades in terms of calculating that. The reason for that is, and they might throw out like a gym grade or a band grade or stuff that's not directly related to grades and academic subjects. And the reason they do that is they find that those grades are not as tied to success in college as your grades in more difficult academic subjects as like sophomores and juniors or seniors in school. And the non-academic score is a lot of it's essays, right? It's your activities list, how you write about your activities, your essays, your additional information section, your recommendations, perhaps you have an interview, all of that kind of fits into the personal score, right? So the key here is that it's not necessarily any one of these factors. It's a combination of factors, but essays play a really critical role in determining the personal score. And as I always have to tell people, it's not like every single essay is scored individually. That's not how it works. It's like after looking at the entirety of the application, how strong is this candidate compared to other candidates on the non-academic profile? Okay. So what does this mean and how does this look like? We're going to use Harvard's admissions data to take a look at this. I know you're probably thinking, oh, Harvard, you know, of course we would use them, you know, but I know many of you do not have students that are necessarily applying to Harvard or other highly selective institutions. That's totally fine. The only reason why we're using Harvard data is literally because it's the only data available related to this, okay? And the only reason why it's available is because Harvard got sued, okay? So they had to publicly release this data. And I combed through thousands of pages of data from Harvard court case documents to pull together all of the bits and pieces of information to really get a picture of how do they actually evaluate applicants in a truest sense. Okay, so what does that mean? Academic score. This is an incredibly important concept. So Harvard applicants, between 2015 and 2019, there were about 40,000 applicants a year. Last year, there were 60,000 applicants to Harvard, okay? They only accept 2,000 students, approximately. 83% of all Harvard applicants are above their academic bar, meaning that Harvard believes that these students are academically capable of succeeding at Harvard. Now, we would all love Harvard to just admit like 10,000 students a year. That would be great. 20,000 students a year. Heck, as we're seeing with this data, they could admit 40,000 students a year. That could be academically successful, right? But Harvard wants to be Harvard, and they're only going to admit a couple thousand, right? Yale wants to be Yale. They're only going to admit a couple thousand. And this is the crux of the entire admissions problem right here, is that you have a lot of students that have very strong academic profiles, and they're applying to schools. They're self-selecting which schools they're applying to based off of their academic profile. And so they're competing with people that also have really strong academic profiles. This applies across every school to a large degree. And we're going to talk later about how does this vary and how important essays are in terms of variance based off of the admit rate of colleges that's coming. Because guess what? At many large public institutions, essays may not matter at all for you. At these highly selective schools, they're going to be a critical factor, which we'll find out about in a second. Because as we look now at the personal score distribution at Harvard, as you can see here, almost nobody has like these possible character flaws, right? We talked about. But 1 in 5 candidates have strong personal scores. Okay, that means that 4 and 5 applicants to Harvard, and a lot of these students have extremely strong profiles from like the activities and other things that they do, but they read flat. Okay, it's what we call reading flat, which basically means that it's really hard to discern how great this student is compared to a pool of applicants that are also really great. And this is really where kind of the storytelling aspect of your student comes in, and through the essays, and oftentimes this is through other things as well, really matters. And as you can see here, it's funny, I always joke, the exceptional stuff, right? That's not your students, right? This is less than 5 students a year, right? This is like the top 6 students in the entire world, right? This is like, that's the exceptional students, right? These are the people that, on the academic profile, they won the world chess championship, right? Or like something crazy like that. They're already a grandmaster. They're, they're doing some crazy, awesome stuff, right? And so what's really matters is kind of just this differentiation here between sufficient and strong. That's what really matters. Okay. So when you plot all of this together on a chart, this is basically what it looks like. Okay. So every single dot here represents 10 applicants, as you can see, relatively few people below the personal bar or academic bars. And this is really where you want to be, right? You want to have a strong personal score, a strong academic score. So see, that's about 75% of all admits Harvard, and this applies to other schools as well, okay? So what does that mean, right? I can just draw a line, and basically 75% of admits are going to fit there. 25% are going to come from this other pool in the white areas, generally speaking. This bottom part here, where let's say you're just sufficient on academic and sufficient on personal, that essentially has an admit rate of like 0.1%, I think it is. It's either 0.1% or 0.01%. It's extremely low, okay? But admit rates start going up when you start having the strong personal score or just strong academic score, but really the personal score tends to carry the day, as we'll see in a second. So this is extremely important, is like getting to the point where you're able to differentiate yourself on your non-academic profile from other colleges and students, okay? Now, Harvard's admissions process is a little more complex than this. They have their personal score, they basically break out into 2 different scores. They break it out into academics, into activity, extracurriculars, and personal score. Some schools call the personal score intellectual curiosity, like Emory University does, but most schools it's just academics and non-academics. Like that's the easiest way to look at it, and that's the easiest way for you all to look at it. And so this is basically how it works, okay? So what does that mean when admit rates actually go up? Okay, so Georgia Tech, historically, and this wasn't the case last year, but in the data set that we're looking at here, has about the same number of applicants as Harvard. And Georgia Tech has a lot of really awesome applicants. And I know a ton of people that have gone to Georgia Tech. It's a fantastic, fantastic school. But guess what? Georgia Tech also admits, I think, like 5 times or 6 times as many students as Harvard. So guess what? They are going to have a higher admit rate, right? Naturally. And guess what happens? Then all of a sudden, they're operating more at this orange line for 75% of admits. Okay. And that really matters to your students. So if you have a strong academic profile and strong academic score, you're probably going to get admitted. And guess what? Your essays are just not going to matter at all. Unless you're literally writing about character flaws that you have. You're like, I stole something, right? Someday in my essay and I learned nothing about it. I just kept stealing more things. Like, that's not what you want to write about. So that's what's going to happen, right? Essentially, like, these students, schools, especially large publics, are going to take a lot of students with very strong academic profiles. They'll take some with, sufficient academic profiles, but strong personal, profiles as well. But this is where things, like, in terms of how you think about essays, matters. Now, a couple quick things I'm going to highlight here, because this is not perfect. Okay. So let's say you're applying to the University of Washington, right? Large flagship state institution, awesome school. Well, guess what? Maybe you've decided to apply to computer science. Well, turns out they don't take every single student that wants to go into computer science. Computer science does not have the same admit rate as the rest of the school. It has a much lower admit rate. So it basically operates, in a lot of cases, some majors at large state institutions operate almost like these highly selective institutions, okay? Where if you're applying for computer science at the University of Washington, it may not be the green line, it may not be quite the orange line, but it's somewhere in between. And all of a sudden, your essays start mattering more, okay? And so these are the things that, like, it's helpful to understand. It's like your major actually matters quite a bit in terms of your admit rate. Even at Harvard, for example, Harvard says that what your intended major is and your life ambitions and what you want to do in the future does not affect admit rate. That is false. The data shows that if you want to go into medicine at Harvard, your admit rate, and this is in that data set that had, roughly 50%, like only had 40,000 applicants, not 60,000 applicants. But in that data set, admit rate for people that wanted to go into medicine, 4%. Admit rate to Harvard of people that wanted to eventually be a teacher, 11%. Okay, literally 3x. So these things do kind of matter, okay? And obviously, don't go out there being like, I want to be a teacher, and nothing in your background signals that you actually want to be a teacher. They're not going to hold you to being a teacher if you get into Harvard, but at the same token, your application needs to read and tie to what you're intending to do, right? That is fairly important, but you also want to take a look at, and a lot of schools don't publish this information, but you want to take a look at what are the admit rates, or how many students are they admitting for these very specific programs for certain majors. This is extremely, extremely, extremely important and an important concept. But as I said, for many of you on this call, your essays may not matter at all. But at the same time, it's really hard to tell if you're going to be a strong academic score or just a sufficient academic score, because they also don't tell you exactly how they calculate that. They just don't, right? So it's really hard to know where you're going to fall in. So I always say, just put the effort in on your essays. You're going to become a better writer through that process anyway. So just do it. At the same time, if you want to be like, hey, am I in this strong academic score profile? And like a easier way to determine that is to look at your grade point average and your standardized test scores. If they're in the top quartile of admitted students at a given school, you're probably in the strong academic score, provided that your strength of curriculum is pretty strong. Okay, that's an important caveat here, because GPA almost doesn't matter to some degree. All these schools are calculating their own GPAs for your kids, basically. Okay, so that it's kind of irrelevant, because what matters is the strength of the curriculum, and the strength of the curriculum in terms of what curriculum you can take actually at your school. Okay, so if your school only offers one AP class, guess what? They're not going to hold that against you. You're like, oh, there's just one AP class. You took the one AP class. Great. If your school does not offer calculus, half of all high schools in the country actually do not offer calculus. And yet calculus is determined to be statistically the single greatest predictor of student success in college, is doing well in calculus in high school, actually. Probably because it's probably one of the most complex subjects to learn in high school. But that particular subject, as I said, half of all high schools don't offer it. So if your school does not offer it, these schools don't hold that against you. And this goes for every school, not just for Harvard. They look at your academic performance in the context of what was there for you. Okay. So what does this all mean, basically, right? So what this means is,
Brad,
go ahead, get some questions.
We have one question coming up often. Your point about the difference in admit rates is struck a nerve, and several people asked, basically, how can I find the admit rates for the schools on my students' college list?
Great question. There's something called the common data set is a place that you could look at it, but honestly, that's pretty complex to do. That's how I would look at data. But there's easier ways to go about doing that. And the easiest way is to Google, just type in like MIT admit rate, or, type in, University of Washington admit rate, or University of Washington computer science admit rate. Usually it'll be like the top hit. A lot of times Google will even just show the information kind of at the top of that. So I like looking at that personally. That's like a really quick way to get the information. When I'm running like big data analysis projects or whatever, I'm like looking at this like massive data set basically. But a lot of times in that data set, they don't break it down by major. And what you can do sometimes online, if you just Google like computer science admit rate at Carnegie Mellon, for example, sometimes some of that information gets out somewhere, and you can find it. But it may not be published on the school's website. It may be in like a quote from an admissions officer from several years ago, right? It may not be the most recent data, but that's still useful data for you, to look at. So Google is pretty useful for this purpose. And so I'd recommend doing that.
So just to clarify, the admit rate is often easy to find, but the admit rate by major may not be publicly available. Right?
Yeah, that may be hard to find, right? And at the same time, be careful. Like if you're on like some random forum somewhere, don't just trust the resources that you see, because we see a lot of misinformation out there on, the college confidentials and other places like that of the world. So you have to be fairly discerning with some of the information that's out there, because some of it's incorrect or anecdotal, or like, oh, I heard this one person sometimes say X information, right? And it's like, playing a game of telephone as a child, right? Or something like that, when you were a child there. So that's a great question. So what does this all mean? Basically, strong academics, so moving from sufficient to strong, can increase your admissions chances up to 3x. Strong non-academics, which is the essay components, can increase your admissions chances up to 10x. Okay, so just to quickly go back to this chart, students in the sufficient category were admitted at about a 2.5% rate into Harvard. And by the way, some of those are athletes, legacies, what's called Dean's List. So these are like parents that may have donated a lot of money to the school, those types of things that make those lists, children of faculty, all of that sort of stuff. That kind of fits in sometimes into these categories because they're, priority, or people that the school deems as like, hey, if I need a tiebreaker between candidates, I'm going to use one of these tiebreakers. And the admit rate, though, for strong is 26%, I think it is. So, so literally a 10x difference. And that really, really matters, right? As I said, 75% of all accepted students actually are in the strong category here. Okay, that's really important. All right, so what does this mean, right? Let's actually now go in and we're going to talk about the 5 traits colleges look for in applicants that can make you a strong, get you to a strong personal score. Okay. So once again, the entire purpose of the college application is to prove you're going to be successful in college and beyond. And by you, I mean your student was going to prove that they're going to be successful in college and beyond. And so this takes me to the single biggest myth that you will hear in all of college essay dem. And the answer is that every single admissions officer, every single counselor that you work with, every single teacher, a lot of previous students are going to tell you this line, that the entire purpose of these essays, that essays are about storytelling. Okay. And this information is misinformation because it is incomplete, right? Because as we just learned, essays are about proving that you're going to be successful in college and beyond. Now, you want to tell a story that's going to prove that you're going to be successful in college and beyond. And guess what? A lot of students see, I need to tell my story, and they tell a story that does not prove they're going to be successful in college and beyond. They tell a story that they think is really interesting and compelling about them, like about their stuffed animal when they were 3 years old and how they lost them and cried for days and then bought a new one, right? Sorry, I have a kid. I have 4 kids, so that's my story today. But this is like the types of essays that students write about, or they'll write about like their family history and their cultural upbringing, and they'll write about, like, I see a lot of ones that try to use imagery about, like, you know, a meal that's being cooked in the household and like what that meal means to them. Guess what? Is that proving success? No. Like, it's not proving to me that you're going to be academically successful in college. It's not proving to me all these other things. It's not proving to me these 5 traits that colleges look for in applicants, which are these things, right? So this is really critical, and all of your students and kind of our pathway for working with students is very much reliant on these 5 traits. We want your students' strengths to really shine through within their essays. If you're working on this yourselves with your students, these are the 5 traits you want all of the content within your applications to tie to. This is extremely, extremely important, okay? And so those 5 traits, which I'm now going to talk about, and then we're going to talk about good topics, bad topics in essays, all of that sort of fun stuff. Getting started with us, your essays, how to write about this. We're going to talk about a couple of examples, all that sort of fun stuff. Take a bunch of questions, but this is really important. So the first trait is drive. So these are students that push themselves to succeed, overcome challenges, and no matter how long the odds are, they're going to get through difficult situations and come out a better person. But not only are they seeing the challenge, they're not passively sitting by and waiting for the time to pass, right? They're taking action. So they're making their situations better, like significantly better in some way by the actions that they're taking. So these are really driven students. Colleges love driven students because guess what? Whenever they come across a challenge, when they're in college or after they graduate, they're going to push through that, right? They're going to succeed in some way. And so, for example, Stu Schmill, who's the Dean of Admissions at MIT, I was talking to him several years ago now, and we were talking about actually the 5 traits. And one of the things that he mentioned was that what they're looking for is students that are unusually driven. So even in a pool of extremely driven applicants, they are looking for the students that set themselves apart as being even more driven than the other driven applicants. Okay. And you can do that through your essays and how you write about the actions that you've taken. Because if the actions that you've taken are oftentimes like, if they think is like, no other student would have done that, right? That's crazy. Like, what were they thinking? Like, that's awesome, right? Those are the types of things you want to highlight. And guess what? Those are things that don't come through in like writing out like the 150 characters in your activities list, right? It doesn't come through in your grades or standardized test scores. That's really important. The second trait is intellectual curiosity. So these are students that love learning just for the fun of it, usually in their free time to gain a deeper understanding of certain subjects or topics of which they're interested in. This is really interesting because a lot of students are actually very intellectually curious, but they don't realize it because it's normal to them. So they love, like, they write their own music, right? They're kind of like dissecting other music that they've seen, and they're kind of learning different components of that, testing that out within their own music. That's extremely intellectually curious. And guess what? A lot of students, like, that's normal for them. They don't even write about it in their essays. Okay. Colleges love students that are intellectually curious because when they're interested in something in college, guess what they're going to do? They're going to push through and they're going to succeed, right? They're going to learn more, right? They're going to learn more in life. Every company wants people that are really intellectually curious. This really matters. It matters so much that Stanford University and many other schools, actually, their supplemental essays specifically ask about intellectual curiosity. One of the common application essay prompts, I think it's prompt number, it's either 5 or 6. Can't remember off the top of my head. I think 6, is about intellectual curiosity, right? This really matters to the point where Emory University doesn't call their personal score the personal score. They call it intellectual curiosity. Okay. So this matters. Third, initiative. These are students that are really entrepreneurial, not willing to accept the status quo. Every time that they're in organizations, they're spotting, or groups of people, they're spotting, they're like, that could be better. That thing is not being done as well as it could. And not only are they identifying them, they're acting, right? They're figuring out how they can actively make it better, right? And they're doing it. Colleges love these students because these are the leaders, right? These are the entrepreneurs. These are the people that kind of get awesome things happening in the school's community. And it really matters to schools, right? Number 4 is contribution. So these are students that whatever group of people they're around, that group of people is much better as a result of their being there. Okay. This could be school organizations, it could be community, it could be just peer groups, right? And they're just making it better, right? As a result of their actions and how they interact with other people, how they improve other people. These are kind of the super connectors, if you will, on a college's campus. Colleges love these people because guess what? Colleges are actually actively trying to have a community within the college because they know that a huge value of going to their college is the network of other individuals that you will create in college, at that college. And so these super contributors are the ones that are the connective tissue basically across the campus. And so they love these types of students, right? These are critical. And then finally is diversity of experiences, right? So students that have different life experiences, different ways of thinking about the world, add unique perspectives to the student body. And when students then interact, when they have all sorts of different interests, all sorts of different backgrounds, they share that information and everybody learns from it and becomes much better as a result of it, right? So we talked before about how Harvard, you know, if you're interested in medicine, 4% admit rate, teaching, 11% admit rate, right? We talked about that. That has something to do with it. Muted by Gerard here. So I have to unmute myself. All good. So you know, at many other schools, this is why, you know, even if everybody wants to go into computer science, they're not going to accept everybody into computer science, right? They want people that have different experiences, right? This is why they're taking people from a lot of different geographies, right? A lot of different countries in the world, a lot of different kind of socioeconomic status and background, right? This is all tied in to this piece around, you know, the 5 different traits. So I don't know, Gerard, there's probably some questions that have rolled in associated with the 5 traits. We can take a couple of those now, and then I'm going to talk about good topics, bad topics, and how to include these in your essays. Go ahead.
Sure. All right. It was an unintentional mute, just for the record, Brad.
Yeah, no, I gathered there was somebody else that you're just like, I'm going to mute everyone. And no, all good.
So one question that I think the answer might be related to the 5 traits. Great question was, for essays, we've heard it's important to avoid talking about religion, but what do you do if that is who your student is and what they want to do? So I think the question is around talking about religion and it's, and should you write about it in your college essay?
Yeah. So the answer is there's a lot of myths out there, right, about college essays. And so let's get back to the core tenets of writing, right? Which is you need to prove you're going to be successful in college and beyond. Okay. Now, essentially what that means is there's no such thing as a bad topic, provided that it relates to the 5 traits and proves that you're going to be successful in college and beyond, right? So there's a lot of misinformation out there, right, that says avoid writing about X. And the reason why a lot of that's out there is because sometimes you probably should avoid writing about X, but it all depends on your own personal situation associated with that topic. So let me give a couple of examples. So religion is a good one, right? So we see many students who want to write about religion, and they end up having awesome essays associated with their religion. But you have to ask yourself is like, okay, there's a version of the essay that is, I'm very religious, and I'm very religious, and I'm very religious. And that's the only information that I basically get out of the essay, okay? And then there's a version of the essay that's, I'm religious, and here's like all of the things that I have done kind of associated with my church or associated with the teachings of that church and applying that in my life, okay? And all of a sudden, those things start relating to drive and initiative, right? And intellectual curiosity in many cases, or contribution, or diversity of experiences. And so it's really all about kind of the experiences that you've had and how you write about them in terms of how that's going to come across to admissions officers. There's a lot of people that are very religious at college campuses, right? That's just the way things are. There's a lot of colleges, even ones you may not even think about, have very active, student groups related to different religions, right? And so it's not necessarily a bad thing to write about. As I said, as I read your essay, if all I'm getting is, wow, you're a very religious student, that's not going to prove success in college and beyond. But all of the things that you may have done associated with your religion, where the theme of your essay is actually about drive or initiative or contribution, but the setting of your essay is associated with your religion, that's great, right? That can be tremendous content. And so that's an awesome question. I'm going to do a couple of other quick examples because you hear the same thing about athletics, you hear the same thing about band, you hear the same thing about drama, such theater, and a lot of other non-academic related student groups or activities. And guess what? For a lot of students, they probably should not be writing about that, because if all I read about in your band essay is, wow, I really enjoy music. And the person leaves like, oh, this student really enjoys music like every other student. That's not that compelling. Or an example I always use is athletics. Okay, so let's say, because we see a lot of these essays, which is like, oh, I scored the game-winning goal. So like that's the essay essentially, right? So, oh, I was really tired on the field. It was a really important game. And, I was so exhausted, but I dug down really deep, and got the ball, beat the defender, and scored the game-winning goal. And that's the essay. And does that prove any of these 5 traits? Not really, right? A lot of people in those moments of like those crunch moments of a game are going to dig down deep and go after it, right? But now imagine the essay is written a little differently, right? So the result might have been scoring the game-winning goal, but the essay is about the process that it took to get there, right? And so it could be spending hours and hours kind of every day outside of practice honing your skills. It could be spending time on YouTube watching videos dissecting Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo and their different moves, and then testing those moves out, practicing those, putting them into your repertoire. And then it just so happened at the most critical juncture of your entire season, you happen to break out one of those moves. It works, and you score the game-winning goal, right? So now you have preparation meets opportunity meets success, right? So I now have an outcome that tied to all of the hard work that I put in, and that's an extremely compelling essay. But for most students that are athletes or just doing a sport, they don't necessarily have that essay to write because they're just, oftentimes just practicing at practice, which is fine, right? That's great. But maybe you shouldn't necessarily write, in some cases, write about athletics in that case. Although we also see awesome stories where the theme of the essay is about leadership and initiative, and the setting of the essay is about is athletics or is band, right? So once again, it's really not about the top, the so-called topic or the experience you're writing about. It's just like those have to match to these traits, and you don't have to cover all 5 traits in your Common App essay or your supplements, right? You want to focus on 2 or 3 strengths, and then in your supplements you might reinforce those strengths or reinforce or cover other traits. So many times very strong students may have all 5 of these traits across their entirety of their application. They might have 2 of these traits coming through in their Common App essay. They might have drive also coming through in some of their supplemental essays, and intellectual curiosity coming through also in those essays, right? So you're kind of not just showing drive in one essay, you're showing it in, like, you're reinforcing it. It's like, I was really driven here, and then I was really driven in this other situation, and then I was really driven in this other situation. And then the person's left thinking, wow, this student's just really driven, right? And then you think they're unusually driven. And guess what? That's what gets you into that strong category, right? As we were just talking about with the MIT people. Gerard, any other questions that have come in on this? We could hit on a couple more things and then take a bunch more additional questions.
Sure. So basically, out of necessity, students need to talk about themselves in their college essay. So Elizabeth asked a great question, which was, can you brag too much in your college essay?
I mean, it depends on what you define as bragging, I guess, right? There's probably things that you should not be bragging about in your college essay. But the answer is not really, right? So let me put it this way. It really just depends on how you write. So if you're just going to write about like a list of your resume, like accolades or awards or honors, that's not that interesting, right? Because those, guess what, are going to show up on your activities list, or your honors that are listed, or in maybe in your additional information section. So instead, like, the bragging needs to be more about like, hey, I'm going to explain to you, here's and this is like a common structure for a supplemental essay. So I'm going to mention this because it works extremely well, right? And it sets up for the same question here, right? So an easy structure to think about for like a shorter kind of supplemental essay is you say, here's the situation. Here was the outcome of the situation. And here's the steps that I took to get to that outcome. Okay. So for example, it might be speech and debate, right? So you might say, hey, I joined speech and debate, my sophomore year, and did some program. I never did speech and debate, so I don't know which, some of it, right? And but the outcome was by X year, let's say within 2 years, I was winning X awards, and I was improving my teammates' abilities, and they were, my team was also winning Y awards more than we've done in the past. Okay, so now I'm seeing the outcome, and I'm like, oh, that's really interesting, right? Clearly, you've worked extremely hard to get to this point, and you've supported your team members to also get to this point. And then you tell them, and here's how I did it, right? And you explain the actions that you actually took to get there, right? That's not bragging, right? That's just saying, like, I'm stating facts, right? This was the situation. Here was the outcomes. Here's the exact steps that I took to reach this outcome. And so the answer is like, yeah, brag. There's a lot of stuff when I was applying to college that I probably should have mentioned in my application, but I did not, because I didn't know. Nobody told me this stuff, right? I did all of it on my own. I was fortunate enough to get into MIT. I think it was more of a stroke of luck than anything, that some of the stuff actually came up in my interview, because I actually saw my notes that the application officer made on my application, and none of the stuff, like very few of the things that were in my notes were actually in my essays. They were kind of from like points from my write-up from my interviewer, which is fun because I actually found my interviewer on like LinkedIn and messaged him like a number of years ago. from MIT. He was like, "Oh, that's cool," because I was like the first person he had ever interviewed for MIT. But the key thing there is like, so I took, before this was like, I guess a thing that more students do now, because the internet was like in its nascency when I was applying to colleges. So like I took a couple of AP exams. I self-studied for the exams. I just bought a textbook and just learned the material. And I self-studied and I got 5s on 2 AP exams that I self-studied for. And I did not mention that on my application at all, right? They just saw the scores, I guess, but they didn't, you can't count on the people to like see the scores and then tie it to your transcript and be like, oh, it looks like there's more scores here than there are classes. That's not a thing, right? So my point is like, you really need to like, this is the process that we go through with students, is we're not just about like, okay, let's write one essay, right? What we're doing is we're saying, let's brainstorm all of your content that relates to all 5 of these traits. We're going to develop a plan for here's what you're going to write about or you need to have included in each of your applications. And then we're going to tie that information to each of the essays that you need to write. So you make sure that you're not going to miss anything. Because I missed a lot of things, right? I started my own bands and we wrote our own music and we played our own shows. Like we booked our own shows in high school. And guess what? Did not mention that at all in my application at all, right? 0. Happened to come up in my interview. I don't know why, just happened to come up, right? Both of these topics. And those were things that were literally mentioned in the like 5 sentences of notes that they made on my application. So, once again, all of these things are pieces that kind of fit together. Obviously, you don't want to leave stuff to chance. And the best way to do that is to make sure that you're identifying everything that's compelling about you and then tying that to different parts of the application. Okay, other questions that may have come in, Gerard? I think I'm going to, as we're doing that, I'm just going to briefly talk about our Prompt.com services. And I think tonight only, and this is not mentioned on this page, but if you go to prompt.com/road to college, and Gerard, I don't know if you can check to make sure that was updated or not. If not, we'll have to send everybody a note. But you can get an extra $10 off tonight only. So instead of $199 for the essay bootcamp, it's $189. Instead of $499 for a one-on-one coaching for just the Common App essay, it is $489. Okay, and so this week only, as you also see here, there's a $100 discount going on our one-on-one coaching. I believe that ends end of day on Saturday, and by end of day on Saturday, I mean when our development team wakes up on Sunday and turns off the discount. So Sunday mornings, usually around like 8 or 9 a.m. And they get turned off. But you should take advantage of this. As I said, we have the top 2% of essay coaches in the world. The essay bootcamp is kind of a group session, but it comes with 2 rounds of essay feedback. And so this is next Tuesday and Thursday. We've had a lot of Road to College families go through the program. I've really enjoyed it and have gotten to the point where they have Common App essays that they feel confident in. And then roughly actually about 3 times as many people that have done the essay bootcamp have actually signed on for the one-on-one coaching, either just for the Common App essay, which is the middle one, or across kind of all of their essays. So you can have options for just like, we could work with you on all of your essays for 3 schools, including your top 3 choice schools, including activities list and additional information section. And then also up to all of your schools. And so there's a link to learn more. You can find out more information there. You can also book time or call us and have a chat. But the other thing you can do is you can always get started and then upgrade later. I highly recommend doing this tonight to get the extra $10 off. The other thing that I'm going to mention is that right now, we are only starting about like 50 new students a week into our one-on-one coaching programs, just because we support thousands and thousands of students a year, and we're getting a lot of students coming in right now. And so if you want to take advantage of this and you want to get started sooner, I'd recommend just like going ahead and making the purchase as soon as you can. So that way, the sooner you make that purchase, the sooner that you're going to be in the list to get to go ahead and get started. And I can take questions on this as well, but you can just go to prompt.com/road to college. Gerard, is that up? Yeah, by
It
any
is.
chance.
Yeah.
The
And
$10 discount. Awesome.
the
Our team is
additional,
awesome.
yeah.
So yeah, we have like about a team of over 100 now, including our writing coaches. And so I'm glad they got that up before this, but I highly recommend doing that. And so Gerard, take it away with questions, and we'll stay on. I know we have 7 minutes more left in the session, but we'll stay on a little bit longer as needed to take more questions.
Sure. So one question that's come up a few times is related to scholarships, and basically, is the advice you're providing, can that contribute to students earning scholarships too?
Great question. So there's kind of multiple kinds of scholarships. I'm going to talk about scholarships for specific schools, and I'm going to talk about scholarships kind of outside of the school application program. So for scholarships that are specifically tied to schools, and a lot of these are actually part of their applications, those we also support students on in the one-on-one coaching process. So if you're working on your top 3 choice schools or all of your schools with us, we're also supporting you on those scholarship essays. And those scholarship essays actually do really matter to earning scholarships, okay? Then there's essays for external scholarships to colleges. Those essays can matter as well, but we also just find, and all the stuff that you're going to learn here translates exactly to that as well. They're also looking for the 5 traits. They also want to know you're going to be successful at college and beyond, right? They're giving you money, and they want to know that, hey, you actually went and did something with the money, right? You were successful. That's awesome. They love that, right? And supporting you. But one thing to just be aware of, and this is not necessarily a subject for this time and today, is that the probability of winning many of these scholarships outside of the schools is quite low in many cases, given the number of applicants to those scholarships. But there are certain scholarships that may have less applicants that are very much tied to something that your student has done, for example, or is interested in, or has a background in, or that sort of thing. So you could, one of the students that we worked with last year won like a very prestigious like New York Times scholarship, actually, which was pretty cool. And I think it was like she got like $10,000 or something like that, or $10,000 a year towards her tuition from the New York Times. But and I believe she used her essays that were associated with the ones that we were working with on the schools that she was applying to. I forget where she's at now, and she got into a lot of awesome institutions from the New York City DOE, I think. So yeah, that's the general gist of it. Okay, other questions come in.
We've gotten many questions along the lines of, is topic X good to write about? And I know you have some feelings.
Yeah, so yeah, we could cover those. Like, that's always super helpful to people. So do we have some topic X's?
Sure.
Or A's or B's or Y's or Z's?
Sure. So one is chess. Writing about chess.
So chess, similar to athletics, can be awesome to write about, but it really needs to be more about like the drive, intellectual curiosity components of it in many cases, and like how are you actually learning the different components of chess. And ideally it relates to like personal growth. So like where you could see like outcome before like really improving was Y, and outcome now is like much higher, right? So I would say including outcomes, especially when they're quantifiable, says a lot within very few words. Because just telling me that, hey, you really worked hard at chess is not that interesting. But if you're like, you really worked hard at chess and now you're like one step removed from being a grandmaster, you're like, oh, okay, that's a little different, right? At working hard at chess, right? In the description of how you went about doing that. So go ahead, next topic X.
Overcoming a sports injury.
So the answer to that is, once again, does this prove success in college and beyond? Okay. A lot of students have torn an ACL, right? A lot of students have had concussions. A lot of students have had these sorts of things, right, happen. And the answer is like, if in your recovery, you did something that went above and beyond, far above and beyond what anybody else in that recovery process would have done, then maybe you can write about it. But if you just recovered, like most people would recover, then don't, okay? Now, sometimes it's an inciting incident to something else. So the sports injury may have happened and it may have led you to do something else. So, I've seen compelling essays where somebody got a concussion, they learned to study and do things in a different way because of it. And then they started a group for like concussion awareness for students, or they actually went out and they were like, hey, let me like lobby the youth football leagues to not be tackle anymore and to be, two-hand touch, like, and they actually did it, right? Those are things that's like, okay, it's the essay is like, there's an inciting incident that's about this injury, but it led to these other things, right? And so that can be compelling. But as I said, you need to be able to clearly show is how is what you did very different than what a typical student that would be going through that situation would have done, okay? And I know not everybody has that, which is fine, but that indicates like maybe there's another better topic to write about.
Another one that's come up a few times, and I linked to our recent related blog post, was, about missing experiences because of COVID or struggles because of COVID.
Yeah, this is hard. Okay. And so once again, we have to think about our, each student needs to kind of think about themselves in context of other applicants, right, to the institutions in which they're applying. So academic struggles because of COVID, I know a lot of students have had them. And that can be written about sometimes in the COVID-19 essay or in the additional information section. But there's a lot of students that have struggled in distance learning. And the question is like, how you as a student have struggled, or your student has struggled differently maybe than other students that may have also had distance learning, right? Because many students did distance learning and they were successful in distance learning. So like, how can, you differentiate yourselves from the other students that may have also had difficulties in distance learning? It's a hard thing to do. And, I kind of need to understand like each, and this is why a coach is really helpful, to understand like each person's situation and figure out how to actually write about that in a way that can be really compelling, and also explain it in a way that is going to be like, oh yeah, this student is still going to be successful in college and beyond, right? Is really important. In terms of like missed activities, everybody missed activities. It could be an inciting incident, like, hey, I didn't have spring soccer, so I did X instead, right? And it had this outcome, or did these things that, so it's like, those are the types of things that can be really compelling, but the whole essay should not be about like, oh, I missed these different experiences due to COVID. Keep in mind, everybody else missed experiences due to COVID, but it can be like an inciting incident associated with it. Yep. Next up, anything else?
We are looking at the Common App, and it looks like we need to write 3 essays. One is generic, the biggest one, select the subject. Second one, why do you select this specific career, up to 500 words? And the third one, because we switched 4 high schools, they want 250 words explaining why we switched so many high schools. Do you guys help with all 3 or only with main one? And maybe we should not list all high schools to avoid even explaining how first I travel.
Yeah, great question. So here's the general gist of it, right? So if you're applying to school, you're probably going to write the Common App essay, because that's the one that's most accepted by most schools, unless you're applying to the University of California, which then has 4 University of California personal insight questions that are 350 words in length. MIT does not accept the Common App. Georgetown does not accept the Common App. And I think University of Washington, or maybe one other. So general gist of it is your Common App essay, that's applied across all schools. And then there's specific essays that you need to either write for, like, that are called supplements for a given school. So that can be like, why do you want to apply to the school? Why do you want to do the major that you're doing? Describe an activity that's particularly meaningful to you and why, as well as a lot of other essays that pieces of information that a school may want to know. We support students in all of those essays. Okay. And so in that, it's like our one-on-one coaching for all of your essays. Okay. For either your top 3 choice schools or all of your schools. Now, there's these other optional essays that also come into play, right? So that might be to do with your specific situation. So let's say you have 4 different high schools you've attended. Guess what? You're submitting the transcripts associated with all of those high schools, probably. So you're going to have to list all of them, and then you're going to have to write those 250 words. And it's not even really an essay; it's really just an explanation.
I see.
Okay? Because what they're trying to get to know is not necessarily like the specific reasons why you moved every time, but they're trying to get a picture of like what is going on at all of these different high schools.
If I spend only 3 months in one of the schools, do I really even need to send transcript? Do I even need to clog this?
I am not the expert on that, but from my understanding, probably yes. So just throw it. I'm not the expert on that. I would ask a school counselor on that, but they do like to see like your entire academic record or all of the schools that you may have attended. And once again, it's really with these optional essays, it's about, a lot of times they're just questions. The additional information section is not an essay, right? You're just kind of listing things basically within it. And the same goes for some of these other ones, is they just kind of want to have an understanding of, because what they're trying to do is they're trying to place you as a student. They're trying to understand you, and they're trying to basically place you in context with other students. And usually it's within context of other students at your high school that you attended. But if you've only been in that high school for maybe a year, it's harder for them to do that. So now they have to have the background of the other schools. So anytime that you're applying to a school, the school is actually getting not just your transcript, the school is also getting a profile of your high school. Your college gets this high school profile, and that gives them a picture of what courses are offered at your high school, and all of this type of information. And if you've only been at the high school a very limited amount of time, it's helpful to understand the academic background and what was available even at the other high schools, such that they can tie that whole picture together of your student, and it won't negatively impact you. Like, that's why they're asking those types of questions. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, next up.
All right, so.
And then we'll wrap up.
Sure. So how about writing about a person you admire and how they inspired you?
Great question. And so this is some supplements as well. Once again, I'm just going to jump back to the 5 traits here. So a lot of these essays are like, I'm going to be honest, like, people should pay me to write their prompts for them, these schools, because not a great job a lot of times, because there's a lot of confusion about like, well, what should be actually written about in some of these cases, right? And so the answer is like, where students go wrong with the writing about somebody that inspires you and why, is that they talk about the person that is inspiring them and provides like a biography almost of the person that inspired them. Like Abraham Lincoln, for example, is a big inspiration for me. But Abraham, so much so that my oldest son is named Lincoln. But Abraham Lincoln, for example, like, you don't want to just write a biography about him, right? The essay needs to be about you and the 5 traits that it's associated with. So ideally, when you're writing about, let's say, Abraham Lincoln, it's like, okay, you might need a short biography if the person may not be like familiar with that person. And by short, I mean like a sentence or 2 about the person. And then it needs to be tied to what specifically did that person do that has dramatically impacted how you think about yourself and the actions that you've actually specifically taken in life. That's really important, right? So it's somebody that's inspiring you. It could even be a parent. And ideally, it can tie to specific actions that you've gone on to take. Okay. That's really, really, really important here, is to tie it to these 5 traits. And so many students go wrong with that. So many students go wrong with that. One of the most fun essays that I've read is there was like one question that was like, you're inviting 4 inspirational people. I think this it was like, maybe it was Villanova, but so there's 4 actually it was Vanderbilt, I think, but there was four, name four, you have a dinner party. Nick, who are you inviting? Which four historical figures or four people are you inviting to your dinner party throughout history? Like anybody could come from any time period. And students would just write, once again, like 4 biographies of people. Like that wasn't very interesting. And yet a student that I remember working with, she ended up, after she kind of made the mistake of writing the biography version of it, she instead had the 4 people, and the 4 people actually were staging an intervention for her to be like, actually, this thing that you wanted to do, like, no, do the that you thought you wanted to do, no, do the thing that you really want to do, that maybe your parents aren't that excited about you majoring in, art. Like, no, go for it, right? And this is like the intervention of these like 3 women, incredible women throughout history that had these different viewpoints and had this incredible story that tied together that really showed, a lot about the student, right? And that's the key part of this, is it relates to the 5 traits improving success in college and beyond. And I think the admissions officers love that so much. I think that she even got like a scholarship for that.
Brad, maybe one a coaching related question. Deborah's wondering, how long is the process if students are working with one of our coaches one-to-one?
Yeah, great question, right? So one thing that I always like to say, and we have like a writing center, and then we also have, if you go to the prompt.com/road to college, if you don't want to use our paid services, we also have a link. You can create a free account and you can access all of like our essay content through there, which I highly recommend. You can also get a list of every essay that you need to write for your schools. You just type in your school list and you get a list of every essay you need to write. Highly recommend using that. But the overall process here is, it's going to save you and your student a lot of time, okay, by working with a coach. Because we have something like, what is it, Gerard? Over 100,000 words or so of content on how to write all the different types of essays. And that's a lot to go through. That's literally like 6 hours of reading right there. And so it's much better to like just work with an expert that just like knows this stuff, can guide you through like what you need to know and what and through that entire process. Typically speaking, if it's a Common App essay, our one-on-one coaching, we do 2 coaching calls with the student, 1 or 2, to get started with the process. The first is what we call an application plan call, where we're identifying everything that you need to write about across all of your essays and across your application. Then we take a couple of those of the key things that you're going to write about, tie those to the Common App essay, and develop an outline together. Okay. Once you have an outline, you write a draft, and that usually takes about an hour and a half, maybe, to write a draft. And then you submit that draft, you get feedback on it. You spend an hour revising your essay, you submit it again, you get feedback on it, you spend maybe 30, 45 minutes revising your essay, you submit it again. For like, usually it takes 3 drafts. You might have like 10, 15 minutes of changes to make. Then we do a final check on the essay and you're done, right? So a lot of students are completing the entire process with somewhere around like 8 hours of their own work over a couple of weeks, okay? And so that works really well. Similar process for working on other essays with students. Usually your top choice school takes the most time to do. You're kind of doing a call to kind of match up all of your content with each of the essays, make sure you're covering everything, planning each essay. Then you write all the essays, you submit them to your coach, you get feedback, you go through that process. Over time, after you've done several schools, you'll start seeing like patterns in essays where, oh, you have like 6 topics you're writing about across each of your applications. And now you're kind of like starting to be like, this 350 word essay over here now needs to be a 250 word essay that matches this other prompt, right? And so you can start tying stuff together and you can start optimizing the process in a more meaningful way. We find that students that are working with us oftentimes are spending, half the time that they would otherwise spend working on their essay with us, or less. Now, this isn't the students that are just going to write the essay the night before. These are the students that are like spending hours thinking about what they're going to write about, writing it, maybe getting feedback from a friend or a parent or a teacher, right? And then they're giving it to like 10 different people. And we often find that very motivated students are somehow spending months writing the Common App essay, and they're writing all the supplements at the last minute. Over 90% of applications are submitted within 48 hours of the deadline, okay? And then guess what? you don't get a score on each of your essays individually. Each essay does not need to be perfect on its own. It's collectively as a whole across essays and all the other components of your application to create that personal score. So it's really about making sure you're giving enough time to each of the essays. So that way the whole picture of you as a candidate comes together. And just so you know, you're probably hearing these supplement essays. By and large, if you're applying to highly selective institutions, many students that we're working with are writing like 30, 40, 50 essays kind of across all of those institutions. Like Brown, I think, for example, has 6 or 7 essays. Stanford has 8. MIT has 5 or 6. Schools are, yeah, there's some overlap. Sometimes there's less overlap, but there's a lot of essays to write. And if you're applying to other selective schools, you might only have 5 or 10 total essays to write. And other schools, if you're applying to large state public institutions, you might only have 1 essay to write, the Common App essay. Or if you're applying to just the University of California system, you might just have 4 University of California personal insight questions that are 350 words in length to write. We have options for all of these different things. But you know, the key is like, get started now, especially if you're going to apply early action or early decision somewhere, because you don't want to be the people coming, you know, the last couple of weeks of October and really stressing about this, because it becomes really hard to get everything done, oftentimes in that short of a time period. All right, anything else that has come in, Gerard, or we can wrap up?
Looks like that's it. We've covered a lot of the questions. I think we touched on all the big concerns.
Yeah, awesome. Well, you can always call us at Prompt, talk to a writing coach. You can also message me at brad@prompt.com. You may not get an immediate response. It might take a day or so, but I do a good job of getting back to people. But I highly recommend, as I said, just go to prompt.com/road-to-college tonight only, basically until our development team wakes up in the morning, or Gerard wakes up in the morning and takes it off. That will be there. So probably until at least 7 or 8 a.m. tomorrow. Highly recommend going ahead and doing that. Also, as I mentioned, the sooner that you do that, the sooner you kind of get in the queue for getting started. As I said, we have our boot camp next week. If you're applying to schools that you might feel like, hey, the essays are not, maybe I'm unsure about how important the essays are, but you still want to have a strong essay, doing the boot camp is a great way to do that for the Common App essay. And we highly recommend it. You know, hundreds of students do that. So highly recommend doing that. We also have scholarships for students on free and reduced lunch programs, and there's ways to access that. I believe that might be listed somewhere on the prompt.com/road-to-college, or as long as you create your free account, there are ways that you can see within the platform to do that. Okay. Thank you all very much this evening. Gerard, is there any final things or any final thoughts that you have, especially as like a former English teacher?
Well, no, we need to do the very important task of giving away our three free boot camps.
Oh, I forgot about that. I am the worst. Thanks, Gerard, for remembering. Give them away. Have you done the randomizer in Excel?
Yeah, let me paste the
Attendee list. Okay, he's going to do a random selection. I'll jump in and we can take 1 or 2 other questions. This was my bad on the boot camp side. This is something new that we're trying, giving them away. So lots of fun. So we're going to go ahead and do that. And so I think there's been some questions in here, like, so if you're a senior in high school and you're working on your college applications now, go ahead and get started. We do have some juniors that go through the bootcamp program, so they can start getting a sense of what is compelling about them from the perspective of colleges, which can be helpful in kind of identifying what can they do between now and when they actually apply to schools to actually improve their essays and their profiles. So that's something that you can do and take advantage of. I don't think you need the one-on-one coaching for that. But it's a good way to kind of get started or get thinking about these different things for your student. And so, you know, you might want to consider doing that as well. And let me see if there's any other final questions that have rolled in here. And we're going to give away the boot camps. And if you're not here, we'll message you. But it's just for people that were intended live this evening. But Gerard, do we have anything here?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, right. Here. So there they are. Congratulations to Adelisa Orantia, Jen Conk, and Tanya Geyer.
All right, awesome. We're going to message you and get you set up for the boot camp. Yeah, if you're going to do the one-on-one coaching, you don't need the boot camp. Okay. We cover the same stuff, except it's one-on-one. We're doing it. Which is really helpful. And as I said, roughly like 3 times as many people do the one-on-one coaching as sign up for the boot camps for the Road to College group. I know we've had a lot of very good positive feedback, across this. Debbie's, I think it was her son last year when he was going through the admissions process, actually got reviews from us as well, which was fun. And so, as I said, just highly recommend do this tonight if you get the chance. If you have any questions, just message us. We'll go from there. All right. And you can always upgrade later. So if you start with one of them options, you can upgrade later. All right. Thank you all very much. I'm assuming we will post this recording at some future point. All right. Bye-bye.